What if a single act of kindness from a hard-working black waitress led to her uniform being violently torn from her body, exposing not just her skin but a tattoo so shocking it froze every single customer mid-bite? In that painful moment of humiliation, as conversations died and silverware clattered to tables, Shayla Williams never imagined that the intricate design on her shoulder blade would catch the eye of the wealthiest man in the county. The tattoo she had hidden for years was about to transform her life in ways she could never have predicted. The fluorescent lights of Rosie's diner flickered weakly above the cracked vinyl booths, casting a harsh glow over the faded red and white checkered floor tiles that Shayla Williams had scrubbed clean at 5 a.m., long before her official shift began. Her black polo shirt with the embroidered Rosie's logo stretched tight across her shoulders as she balanced 5 plates along her forearm, a skill perfected over 3 years of double shifts and aching feet. The small gold name tag pinned above her heart caught the light as she moved between tables, with a grace that belied her exhaustion, her dark skin glowing with a thin sheen of sweat despite the faltering air conditioning unit that rattled like an old man coughing in the corner. Shayla wore her hair pulled back in a tight bun, professional and practical, revealing high cheekbones and eyes that still managed to crinkle at the corners when she smiled at Mrs. Abernathy, a regular who always ordered toast dry and coffee black but never left more than $1 tip. The diner hummed with morning chatter, the clink of silverware against ceramic plates mixing with the sizzle of bacon on the grill, and the occasional shout from Cook Luis calling out orders in his booming voice. A sharp contrast to the ambient noise, the bell above the door chimed softly as Victor Harrington entered, his tailored charcoal suit and polished leather briefcase immediately marking him as out of place among the factory workers and early shift nurses who formed Rosie's usual clientele. Shayla felt her shoulders straighten automatically as she grabbed a fresh mug and the premium coffee pot they kept specifically for his daily visit, her movements efficient as she navigated to his usual corner booth where sunlight struggled through windows in need of washing. Behind the counter, manager Ted beckoned her with a stubby finger, his voice low but not low enough to hide his words from nearby customers. The rent check had bounced again, 3rd time this year, and he could only cover for her with the owner so many times, no matter how reliable she was on the schedule. Shayla absorbed the humiliation with a small nod, her face revealing nothing. As she turned back to pour Mr. Harrington his coffee, noticing how he always placed his crisp 20 on the table first, how his eyes never lingered inappropriately like some customers, how he seemed to actually see her as a person rather than part of the furniture. The weight of her phone in her pocket felt suddenly heavy. 3 missed calls from Zoe's foster mother about school supplies she had promised to provide, bills piling up on her apartment counter like autumn leaves, the final notice from the electric company threatening disconnection by Friday. Shayla topped off Mr. Harrington's coffee with steady hands despite everything crumbling around her, offering a professional smile that never reached her tired eyes as she wondered how many extra shifts she would need to beg for this week, how much longer she could maintain this fragile balancing act before something finally, inevitably, broke. Friends, before we go further, may I ask a small favour? Please, subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us keep bringing you these stories, and reaching 1,000 subscribers soon is so important for us to continue. We also love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how our little storytelling circle is spreading across the world. And if you enjoyed the beginning, give this video a like and let's share thoughts on the whole story together below. The lunch rush hit Rosie's diner like a thunderclap, every table filled with hungry customers as Shayla navigated the narrow spaces between chairs with practiced precision, her black polo shirt with the embroidered Rosie's logo already damp with sweat from the broken air conditioning and the kitchen heat. The cacophony of voices competed with clinking silverware and the sizzle of the overworked grill as she balanced a tray of burgers above her shoulder, her gold name tag catching the fluorescent light with each determined step toward table 7. She noticed Craig Westfield and his buddies the moment they stumbled in, their expensive watches and perfectly styled hair marking them as out of place in the working-class establishment. But it was the glassy-looking Craig's eyes and the way he sloshed his drink that set off warning bells in her mind. 3 martini lunches were standard for the son of Douglas Westfield, the real estate developer whose company logo emblazoned half the construction projects in town, his reputation for treating service workers like personal servants preceding him through whispered warnings among the diner staff. Shayla tried to adjust her path to avoid their table, but the diner layout forced her to pass within arm's reach of Craig, whose bloodshot eyes tracked her movement with predatory interest. his lips curling into something too cruel to be called a smile. She felt his foot extend into her path a moment too late, her forward momentum already committed as her ankle caught against his designer shoe, sending her stumbling forward as gravity took cruel hold. The tray launched from her hands in a spectacular arc, plates and food creating a destructive constellation across the checkered floor. But it was the sudden sharp tug she felt at her back that transformed accident into assault. Craig had reached out as she fell, fingers deliberately curling into the fabric of her uniform shirt. The sound of ripping cloth cutting through the diner noise like a gunshot as the entire back of her polo tore open from collar to hem. Her fall completed in horrifying slow motion, hands splayed against the sticky floor, cool air rushing against her exposed skin as the diner fell into a silence so absolute she could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. It was the collective gasp that told Shayla what had happened, before she even felt the burning shame rising up her neck and flooding her cheeks. The intricate phoenix tattoo that spread its wings across her right shoulder blade was now visible to every customer, the vibrant reds and golds of the bird rising from flames a stark contrast against her dark skin. A secret piece of herself, never meant for public display. Tears of humiliation burned behind her eyes as she remained frozen on hands and knees, surrounded by broken plates and scattered food, feeling dozens of stares boring into her exposed back like physical touches, while Craig and his friends erupted into cruel laughter. From his corner booth, Victor Harrington lowered his newspaper, his coffee forgotten, as his eyes narrowed at the scene before him, then widened with shock as they fixed upon the phoenix tattoo. Recognition flashing across his face like lightning across a night sky. His entire body tensing as if he had witnessed not merely an act of cruelty, but a revelation that would alter the course of lives forever. The silence hanging over Rosie's diner crystallized into something tangible as Victor Harrington rose from his corner booth, abandoning his half-empty coffee cup and newspaper with deliberate calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the moment. His eyes never left the intricate phoenix spread across Shayla's exposed shoulder blade, the vibrant reds and golds forming a bird rising triumphantly from stylized flames, its wings curved in a distinctive pattern he had seen only once before in his family's private collection of historical artifacts. The tattoo was an exact match to the lost phoenix medallion, a priceless relic his grandfather had spent decades searching for after it disappeared during the turbulent years following World War II. His distinctive artistry unmistakable to someone who had grown up studying the single surviving sketch. Victor shrugged out of his tailored suit jacket in one fluid motion, crossing the diner floor with measured steps that somehow commanded attention without seeking it, the expensive fabric of his trousers whispering against polished leather shoes, as conversations dissolved into curious murmurs around him. Craig Westfield smirked up from his seat, mouth opening to deliver another barbed comment, until he met Victor's gaze, and something in those steel-grey eyes made the younger man shrink back into his chair, alcohol-fueled bravado evaporating, like morning dew under a harsh sun. With a gentleness that belied his commanding presence, Victor draped his jacket over Shayla's exposed back, the warm weight of it pulling her from the frozen shock of humiliation as tears threatened to spill onto her cheeks. The scent of subtle cologne and fine wool enveloped her, creating a momentary barrier between her vulnerability and the prying eyes of the diner patrons. Victor extended his hand to help her stand, his palm warm and dry against her trembling fingers as manager Ted finally broke from his own stunned immobility behind the counter, rushing forward with cleaning supplies and stammered apologies that seemed directed more toward the wealthy businessman than his injured employee. Shayla clutched the edges of the oversized jacket closed across her chest, her gold name tag now crooked on what remained of her torn Rosie's diner polo, dignity attempting to reassert itself in small incremental breaths as Victor turned to Craig with quiet authority that required no raised voice. With a few precisely chosen words about contacting Douglas Westfield regarding his son's behaviour, Victor effectively dismissed Craig and his friends, who slunk from the diner trailing muttered excuses and reluctantly tossed bills. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted like weather-changing seasons, humiliation giving way to something entirely unexpected, as Victor leaned close to Shayla, his breath warm against her ear, voice pitched for her alone as the diner gradually resumed its normal rhythm around them. His words were few but laden with meaning that would echo through the coming days and weeks, altering the trajectory of her life with their simple weight. That phoenix has significance beyond what you know. We need to talk. The morning sun filtered through thin curtains in Shayla's one-bedroom apartment, casting hopeful rectangles of light across the worn but spotless hardwood floor she had polished last Sunday during her precious few hours off. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the crisp white envelope that had been waiting with her name carefully printed on the front when she arrived for her morning shift, the Rosie's Diner logo on her fresh replacement polo shirt reflecting in the small hallway mirror as she pulled out a stack of $100 bills bound with a simple paperclip. $5,000, more money than she had held at once in her entire life, accompanied by a business card embossed with the Harrington Investments logo in subtle silver against heavy cream stock, a handwritten note on the back reading, "For your dignity," and a conversation about your tattoo. Shayla sank onto her second-hand sofa, the springs protesting beneath floral slipcovers she had sewn herself, her eyes moving from the money to the cluttered coffee table where unpaid bills fanned out like a losing poker hand. Final notice from the electric company, past due rent, medical bills from when Zoe had pneumonia last winter, school registration fees coming due next month. The apartment was clean but sparse, mismatched furniture arranged with care to disguise their yard sale origins, the walls decorated with colourful drawings signed in a child's careful hand rather than proper artwork. A collection of framed photographs clustered on the single bookshelf told the story her words rarely did. Shayla and a slightly younger woman with the same high cheekbones and determined eyes, arms wrapped around a gap-toothed girl of about 7, the same child blowing out birthday candles, Shayla in her Rosie's uniform crouching next to the girl on her first day of school. The ancient cordless phone felt heavy in her hand as she dialed the familiar number, waiting through the automated message about accepting charges from the state correctional facility before her sister Teresa's voice came through, more subdued than it had been 4 years ago, but still carrying echoes of their shared childhood laughter. Shayla described the incident at the diner in measured tones, downplaying the humiliation while emphasizing the unexpected financial windfall. Tears finally breaking free as she admitted the money could cover Zoe's transition from the foster home back to her care 3 months earlier than planned, Teresa's choked sob of gratitude carrying through the tinny connection. The visiting room sessions, with a glass barrier between them, had grown harder to bear as Teresa served her 8-year sentence for a crime committed in desperate circumstances not unlike Shayla's own current situation, the weight of raising her niece while working double shifts pressing down on her shoulders with each passing month. As she ended the call with promised updates about Zoe's school progress, Shayla stared at the money on her coffee table, understanding with crystal clarity exactly how much she had to lose, how precarious her grip on this tiny slice of stability remained, and how a mysterious tattoo inherited from her grandmother had suddenly, inexplicably, become both her greatest vulnerability and potentially her unexpected salvation. The gleaming glass and steel of Harrington Tower stretched toward the clouds like a monument to wealth and privilege, its reflective windows catching the afternoon sun and casting it back as blinding flashes that made Shayla squint as she approached the revolving doors, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step that took her further from the familiar world of Rosie's Diner. She had changed out of her work uniform into her single good outfit, a modest navy blue dress purchased for court appearances during Teresa's trial, yet she might as well have worn rags for all the barely concealed looks of assessment from the sleek professionals gliding across the marble lobby in designer suits and clicking heels. The security guards behind the polished reception desk watched her approach with thinly veiled suspicion, their eyes tracking her movement as if calculating the probability of theft or disruption, one hand hovering near the radio at his belt until she nervously presented her ID and mentioned Victor Harrington's name. Everything about the tower screamed that she did not belong, from the abstract art installations whose significance eluded her, to the hushed conversations in what sounded like multiple languages, drifting from huddled groups of executives near the coffee bar whose single cups probably cost more than she made in tips during an entire breakfast shift. The elevator ascended with silent efficiency, numbers illuminating like countdown to judgment as Shayla clutched her worn purse containing the business card and her grandmother's only possession she had kept after her passing 3 years ago, a small leather journal whose pages contained sketches of the same phoenix that now stretched its wings across her shoulder blade. When the doors parted on the executive floor, she stepped into a world of understated luxury, all mahogany paneling and lush carpets that seemed to absorb sound and create pockets of perfect privacy around each seating arrangement. Victor himself emerged from massive double doors to greet her, his welcoming smile seeming genuinely warm as he guided her past curious glances from his staff into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city sprawl, including the small neighborhood where her apartment building, huddled among others just like it, suddenly looking as insignificant as ant hills from this godlike vantage point. Tea appeared in delicate china cups before she had fully settled into a leather chair, worth more than her entire furniture collection. Victor dismissing the hovering assistant with gentle efficiency before focusing his full attention on Shayla, his eyes alight with an excitement he could barely contain as he revealed that her tattoo, acquired to honor her grandmother's memory, was an exact replica of the Phoenix medallion, a priceless artifact his family had sought for 4 generations after its disappearance during post-war chaos, believed to contain encoded coordinates leading to a collection of cultural treasures hidden from those who would destroy them, valued not just in monetary terms but as irreplaceable pieces of shared human heritage that his grandfather had devoted his life to protecting. Victor leaned forward across his expansive mahogany desk, spreading out yellowed documents and faded photographs with careful reverence, his voice dropping to a near whisper despite the absolute privacy of his corner office as sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced between them like miniature galaxies. The Phoenix design, he explained, was far more than decorative art or family sentiment. When properly decoded, the intricate patterns within the flames and the precise curve of the wings contained geographical coordinates leading to a hidden vault somewhere in Europe protecting priceless artifacts, including rare manuscripts, religious icons, and Renaissance artwork that had belonged to the Harrington family for generations before being stolen during the chaos following World War II. His grandfather had spent decades searching for the Phoenix medallion, believing it was the only surviving key to recovering their cultural heritage. Its value measured not merely in the millions it would bring at auction, but in its historical significance and the personal connection to ancestors who had collected these treasures as custodians rather than owners. Victor pushed a leather portfolio across the polished surface towards Shayla, its contents outlining a partnership proposal including a substantial finder fee, regardless of the outcome, equal profit sharing if the collection was recovered and sold, and all expenses covered for what might require international travel, his eyes never leaving her face as he watched the staggering figures register in her carefully controlled expression. Shayla ran her fingers over the contract pages, her mind racing to calculate how many double shifts at Rosie's it would take to earn even a fraction of the initial payment being offered, the opportunity colliding with suspicion as she tried to reconcile this surreal moment with yesterday's humiliation on the diner floor. With hesitation dissolving into determination, she reached into her worn purse and withdrew her grandmother Rose Williams's journal, its leather cover cracked with age, explaining in measured tones how she had discovered the Phoenix design among her grandmother's belongings after her passing 3 years ago, and chosen the tattoo as a permanent memorial to the woman who had raised her after her own mother disappeared. The coincidence seemed too fantastic to be real, yet the spark of recognition in Victor's eyes as he gently accepted the journal could not be manufactured, his sharp intake of breath when he saw the name inscribed inside the cover, confirming a connection neither had anticipated. Rose Williams, Victor revealed with quiet amazement, had worked in the Harrington household staff for nearly 40 years, serving his grandfather as trusted personal assistant during the very period when the search for the Phoenix medallion had consumed the family resources, the revelation creating a bridge across social divisions that suddenly made their unlikely meeting seem almost predestined rather than random chance. Shayla studied Victor's face for any sign of deception or manipulation, weighing the risks of trusting a wealthy stranger against the overwhelming evidence before her, and the opportunity that could forever change her circumstances, provide for Zoe's future, and perhaps fulfill a legacy her grandmother had carried silently for decades, the weight of decision pressing upon her like physical gravity as Victor waited with uncharacteristic patience for her answer. 40 floors above the city in the gleaming glass spire of Westfield Plaza, Douglas Westfield stood at his wall of windows, expensive binoculars trained on the corner office of Harrington Tower, where an unexpected meeting had captured his complete attention. The sleek minimalist office behind him reflected his business philosophy, all chrome and glass with sharp angles and monochromatic colour scheme. Deliberately intimidating with its lack of personal touches or comfortable seating, the temperature maintained at a perpetual 68 degrees that kept visitors slightly uncomfortable and meetings efficiently brief. Douglas lowered the binoculars, his thin lips pressing into a bloodless line as he watched Victor Harrington lean forward with unusual animation, spreading documents before that waitress from the diner, the same one his son Craig had mentioned humiliating yesterday, in what Douglas had dismissed as pointless juvenile behaviour until this curious development. He pressed an intercom button on his glass desk where not a single paper disrupted its pristine surface, summoning Craig from the outer office with an imperious gesture that brooked no delay, noting with distaste the lingering scent of alcohol that surrounded his son, even at 3 p.m. The Harrington and Westfield families had competed for generations, their developments facing off across the city skyline like chess pieces on an urban board. But only Douglas knew the lengths to which he had gone to systematically undermine Victor at every opportunity, from bribing city officials to reroute the new light rail past Westfield properties to hiring away key architects from Harrington projects. For 30 years he had employed increasingly questionable tactics to maintain his advantage, the legitimate business rivalry of their father's generation having devolved into something darker under his direction, fueled by the resentment of the Harrington family name and their insistence on ethical development practices that Douglas viewed as weakness in a cutthroat industry. He instructed Craig to discover why Victor Harrington, whose net worth exceeded 8 figures and who rarely took meetings with anyone below executive level, was suddenly interested in a struggling waitress from a diner in the deteriorating River District, the very neighbourhood where their companies were currently battling for redevelopment rights. Douglas settled into his ergonomic chair that prioritised posture over comfort, scrolling through property records on his tablet with manicured fingers, already calculating how this unexpected connection might be leveraged against his longtime rival, mentally shifting Shayla Williams from irrelevant service worker to potential chess piece in the ongoing war between development empires that had consumed 3 decades of his life. Behind him, the city stretched out like a living blueprint, neighbourhoods divided by invisible lines of affluence and neglect. The River District sitting like an unclaimed prize between Harrington and Westfield territories, its fate hanging in the balance along with the residents who had no idea their homes and livelihoods had become collateral damage in a conflict between powerful men who viewed the city not as a community, but as assets to be acquired regardless of human cost. Sunlight streamed through new curtains in shades of purple and gold, Zoe's favourite at colours, casting a warm glow across freshly painted walls that had transformed the once dreary apartment into something approaching magical over the course of 3 exhausting days. Shayla stood in the doorway of the bedroom she'd converted from her own sleeping space, watching as her niece carefully arranged stuffed animals on the twin bed with its bright patchwork quilt, each placement deliberate and serious as a museum curator handling precious artefacts. The social worker had seemed genuinely surprised at the transformation of both the apartment and Shayla's financial situation, her clipboard notations turning from sceptical to approving as she verified the paid utility bills, stocked refrigerator, and separate bedroom that met fostering requirements, the suspicious questions about sudden income improvements answered with carefully rehearsed explanations about consulting opportunities related to historical research. Boxes of new clothes and school supplies lined one wall, not extravagant but sturdy and practical, representing more security than either Shayla or Zoe had known since Teresa began her prison sentence 4 years ago, the absence of financial panic almost as disorienting as its constant presence had been. Zoe looked up from her arranging, her smile revealing the same gap between front teeth that Teresa had at that age, launching herself across the room to wrap arms tightly around Shayla, with such force that both nearly tumbled to the floor, her small body shaking with emotions too complex for her 9 years to fully process or express. Nights of sleeping on the sofa would be a small price to pay for the weight of this child in her arms again. The scent of her strawberry shampoo. The sound of her voice filling rooms that had echoed with loneliness for too many months during weekend visits that always ended too quickly. With tearful returns to the foster home where Zoe had been placed when Shayla initially failed to qualify as guardian. They prepared dinner together in the small kitchen, chopping vegetables side by side as Zoe chattered about school projects and friends, questions about this new life together, flowing until the inevitable one finally emerged between bites of spaghetti with actually fresh parmesan instead of the powdered kind from a green container. Shayla considered her answer carefully when Zoe asked how everything had changed so quickly, how they could suddenly afford to be together again, her eyes wide with the wisdom children sometimes possess when witnessing adult struggles, searching for reassurance that this miracle would not dissolve like morning fog. Shayla tucked a loose strand of hair behind Zoe's ear, remembering the weight of Victor Harrington's contract in her bag, the coordinates hidden in her tattoo, and all the uncertainty still stretching before them balanced against this perfect moment of reunion, finally answering with simple truth that contained both gratitude and caution. Sometimes miracles come from strange places. The important thing is recognizing them when they appear and using them to take care of what really matters. The City Historical Archives occupied the basement of the old public library, a cavernous space illuminated by hanging brass lamps that cast pools of amber light over long wooden tables, where researchers hunched like devoted monks at their secular prayers. Shayla ran her fingers over brittle employment records from the 1960s, the paper texture rough against her fingertips as dust particles danced in light beams, her mind struggling to reconcile the elegant cursive listing Rose Williams, personal assistant to Maxwell Harrington, with the grandmother who had taught her to make perfect cornbread in a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and safety. Victor moved with surprising familiarity through the labyrinthine shelving system, retrieving leather-bound family journals and photographs with efficient precision, his tailored sleeves rolled up to expose forearms dusted with dark hair. The Rolex watch that probably cost more than 6 months of Shayla's rent temporarily abandoned beside a stack of yellowed newspapers. The social gulf between them seemed both vast and insignificant in this timeless place where their family histories converged. Victor pointing to a black and white photograph showing a distinguished grey-haired man standing beside a younger, dignified black woman whose high cheekbones and determined expression unmistakably mirrored Shayla's own features. Maxwell Harrington had hired Rose fresh from secretarial school in '65, Victor explained, breaking with tradition by employing a black woman as his personal assistant rather than household staff, trusting her with family matters beyond typical professional boundaries during the turbulent search for the missing artifacts. Shayla shared stories from her childhood with growing animation, descriptions of the grandmother who had raised her after her mother disappeared, who never spoke of prestigious employment yet had insisted on perfect diction and impeccable manners even when their circumstances grew desperate, who had pressed the journal containing the Phoenix design into her hands before passing with instructions to guard it carefully until the right time came. Hours dissolved into a comfortable rhythm of discovery, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they leaned over particularly interesting documents, the initial awkwardness melting into something approaching friendship as class distinctions and racial differences receded behind shared purpose and mutual respect. When the archivist announced closing time, they gathered their notes with reluctant efficiency, Victor helping Shayla into her jacket with the automatic courtesy that spoke of his upbringing, her thanks genuine rather than resentful as it might have been days earlier, when such a gesture would have felt patronizing rather than considerate. Outside, streetlights flickered to life against the gathering dusk as they paused on the library steps, surrounded by the transitional magic of a city transforming from day to night, Victor suggesting dinner at a nearby cafe with the casual ease of colleagues rather than the calculated formality of business associates, Shayla accepting with equal naturalness, both aware that something significant had shifted between them amid the dust and whispers of an archive, where past and present had momentarily merged into a shared future neither could have anticipated. Street lamps cast elongated shadows across the cracked pavement as Shayla fumbled for her keys, grocery bags hanging heavy from her wrists, the night air carrying the first hint of autumn chill that slipped beneath her light jacket like ghostly fingers. The black Lincoln town car had been parked across the street when she stepped off the bus, its tinted windows reflecting distorted images of the surrounding buildings, but she had dismissed it as belonging to one of the rare visitors to her modest neighborhood until the rear door swung open with silent precision just as she reached her apartment steps. Douglas Westfield emerged with the controlled movement of a predator, expensive cologne announcing his presence before his voice broke the quietude, his tailored overcoat and silver hair lending him the appearance of respectability that his eyes, cold and calculating as they assessed her, immediately contradicted. He introduced himself with practiced charm that never reached those eyes, mentioning his son only briefly to acknowledge the unfortunate diner incident before smoothly transitioning to business, each word carefully selected to suggest insider knowledge of her arrangement with Victor Harrington. The street suddenly felt exposed and threatening, nearby apartments with their drawn blinds offering no witness protection as Douglas stepped closer, explaining that whatever Victor was paying for her cooperation regarding certain historical artifacts, he would gladly double the amount for the same information, no questions asked. When Shayla clutched her grocery bags tighter and remained silent, Douglas shifted tactics with the ease of someone accustomed to negotiation, his voice dropping to a confidential tone as he suggested that Victor Harrington, was notorious for exploiting people from her background, dangling promises of partnership while ultimately claiming all discoveries for himself, specifically mentioning 3 former associates who had been discarded once their usefulness ended. Something in his precise knowledge of her situation sent a chill through Shayla that had nothing to do with the evening. Temperature, doubt taking root like an unwelcome weed as Douglas pressed a business card into her hand, the expensive stock feeling somehow contaminating against her skin as he assured her his offer remained open, suggesting she research Victor's past business dealings before placing complete trust in someone whose world operated by different rules than her own. Long after the Lincoln glided away into the darkness, Shayla stood frozen on her steps, grocery bags cutting circulation into her wrists, Douglas Westfield's insinuations echoing in her mind against memories of Victor's apparent sincerity, questions multiplying like bacteria in a petri dish as she wondered why a wealthy businessman would truly share profits with a waitress, how her grandmother had actually been involved, whether the warmth she had begun feeling toward Victor was genuine or calculated manipulation designed to gain her cooperation at minimum cost. By the time she unlocked her apartment door to find Zoe waiting with excited stories about school, the seeds of suspicion had taken root, sprouting tendrils of doubt that wrapped around her growing trust in Victor Harrington, threatening to strangle it before it could fully bloom. The leather journal lay open on Shayla's kitchen table beneath the single pendant light, its pages revealing secrets in her grandmother's elegant handwriting that connected past to present like a bridge spanning decades of silence. Zoe slept soundly in her new bedroom, while Shayla pored over entries dated 1972, discovering that Rose Williams had been far more than a personal assistant to Maxwell Harrington, becoming his trusted confidant during the frantic weeks when anonymous threats had arrived regarding the family's quest to recover their stolen cultural treasures. Her grandmother described in careful detail how she had helped Maxwell create an elaborate encoding system using the Phoenix design from family heraldry, transforming it from mere decoration into a sophisticated cipher containing coordinates that would lead to the hidden vault where artifacts had been secretly relocated after a break-in attempt at the main Harrington estate. The final journal entry explained Rose's most solemn responsibility, accepting the Phoenix design as a tattoo hidden beneath her clothing, becoming a living map to treasures too valuable to risk documenting in any form that could be stolen, with instructions to pass the knowledge through family lines until a Harrington came seeking answers without the proper recognition signals. Shayla traced her fingers over the sketch that mirrored the tattoo on her own shoulder blade, understanding now why her grandmother had insisted she memorize certain phrases and numerical sequences as a child, lessons disguised as games that had seemed meaningless until this moment of revelation. Morning sunlight streamed through Harrington Tower windows as Shayla placed the journal before Victor, watching his expression transform from professional interest to stunned recognition, as he read passages describing his grandfather or son with such personal insight that tears gathered unexpectedly at the corners of his eyes, his composure momentarily forgotten. His fingers trembled slightly against the yellowed paper as he discovered his family history from a perspective never recorded in official documents, learning how Rose had risked her own safety multiple times to protect information about artifacts whose cultural significance transcended their monetary value, even travelling to Europe as Maxwell's secretary to help establish the secure location mentioned in coded references throughout the journal. Victor looked up with naked emotion, unlike anything Shayla had witnessed from him previously, his voice rough with feeling, as he reached across the polished desk to grasp her hand. Cultural and social differences momentarily irrelevant in the face of a connection forged by their grandparents decades before either was born. The genuine gratitude shining in his eyes dissolved her lingering doubts more effectively than any contract or promise, as he spoke words that acknowledged a debt transcending financial arrangements. Your grandmother saved our family legacy. The truth of their unexpected partnership crystallized in that unguarded moment, creating a foundation of trust that Douglas Westfield's insinuations could no longer easily undermine, the mysterious phoenix tattoo transforming from merely valuable to sacred in its representation of faith kept across generations. The forged documents emerged from Douglas Westfield's private printer, bearing authentic Harrington investment letterhead, complete with legal language detailing plans to establish sole ownership of all recovered artifacts through a series of shell companies that would effectively eliminate Shayla Williams as financial beneficiary once the location was confirmed. Craig nursed a coffee at Rosie's diner for 3 consecutive mornings, observing Shayla's routine with uncharacteristic patience until the perfect opportunity presented itself during a chaotic breakfast rush when she disappeared into the kitchen for a particularly large order. With practiced sleight of hand perfected through years of fraternity pranks, he slipped the sealed envelope into the side pocket of her purse, hanging beneath the counter, departing with an unusually generous tip that almost made him feel better about his participation in his father's scheme. The documents remained undiscovered until Shayla collapsed onto her sofa that evening, reaching into her bag for her phone and finding instead crisp papers whose official appearance immediately captured her attention, their contents transforming exhaustion into shocked betrayal as legal terms jumped from the pages spelling out elaborate mechanisms to isolate Victor as sole beneficiary of all recovered artifacts, with specific mentions of using her grandmother's information while ensuring minimum financial obligation to the Williams family. Coffee mugs rattled on Victor's desk the following morning as Shayla slammed the documents down before him, her Rosie's diner uniform still on because she had come directly from her early shift, gold name tag catching light as her chest heaved with barely controlled fury. The trust that had grown between them over weeks of research and shared discoveries lay shattered at their feet as she demanded explanations for clauses authorizing international attorneys to establish Victor as exclusive owner once her grandmother's cipher was fully decoded. Confusion clouded Victor's expression as he scanned pages bearing his company letterhead, but containing legal strategies he had never authorized, his protestations of innocence falling on ears deafened by a mounting evidence that she had been naive to trust someone from his world. Security guards hovered nervously outside the office door as their voices escalated, Shayla recounting Douglas Westfield's warnings that now seemed prophetic rather than manipulative, Victor attempting to examine the documents more carefully while simultaneously trying to contain a situation rapidly spinning beyond his control. The intimacy they had developed dissolved into rigid formality as Shayla reminded him that without her tattoo and her grandmother's journal he would never locate the artifacts, while Victor insisted the documents must be forgeries created to drive precisely this wedge between them. Years of watching her sister railroaded by a legal system designed to protect the powerful had taught Shayla to expect betrayal from men in expensive suits bearing official papers, her walls slamming back into place as she gathered her belongings, informing Victor that their partnership was terminated effective immediately, her grandmother's journal tucked safely at home where it would remain until she determined her next move independently. Sunlight seemed to mock Shayla as she burst from Harrington Tower, tears blurring her vision while security guards averted their eyes with practiced discretion, her entire body trembling with emotions that cycled between rage and devastating disappointment. Victor had called after her, his denials echoing through the marble lobby as elevator doors closed between them, but the evidence had seemed irrefutable, the legal documents bearing official letterhead confirming her deepest fears that she had been manipulated by someone whose wealth and privilege allowed him to discard people once their usefulness ended. The city streets offered no comfort as she walked blindly, her work uniform drawing curious glances from passing professionals in their tailored suits, the weight of betrayal pressing against her chest until breathing became a conscious effort requiring concentration. Craig Westfield appeared beside her so suddenly she nearly collided with him, his designer cologne replacing the lingering scent of Victor that had clung to her clothing after their heated confrontation, his expression holding unexpected sympathy that contrasted sharply with their previous diner encounter. He apologized for his earlier behavior with surprising sincerity before mentioning that his father had anticipated Victor might attempt to exploit her connection to valuable artifacts, suggesting that Douglas could offer protection from legal manipulation by someone with Victor's resources and influence. Suspicion warred with desperation as Shayla considered her limited options, the need to protect her grandmother's legacy and secure Zoe's future, eventually overriding her instinctive distrust of this sudden alliance with the Westfields, leading to her reluctant agreement to meet Douglas that afternoon. Westfield Plaza loomed like a silver dagger piercing the sky, its reflective exterior revealing nothing while absorbing everything, mirroring Shayla's growing sense of being caught between powerful forces using her as a pawn in some larger game whose rules remained obscure. The executive elevator ascended with clinical efficiency, depositing her into a reception area where chrome and glass created an atmosphere of deliberate intimidation, everything designed to diminish visitors before they even entered Douglas Westfield's inner sanctum. The temperature drop was immediate upon crossing his office threshold, both literal and metaphorical, as Douglas dismissed Craig with a curt nod, transforming from solicitous concern to calculated intensity once they were alone, his true nature emerging like a snake shedding an inconvenient disguise. Photographs of her apartment building covered his desk, alongside printouts of Zoe's foster care records and Teresa's prison documentation, the implied threat requiring no verbal articulation as Douglas leaned forward with fingers steepled beneath his chin, demanding complete information about the tattoo meanings, geographical references, and any codes contained in her grandmother's journal, his eyes cold and voice precise as he outlined consequences should she withhold anything relevant to locating artifacts that he claimed had been rightfully purchased by his family decades ago before being stolen by the Harringtons. Security monitors illuminated Victor Harrington's face with ghostly blue light as he reviewed footage from Rosie's diner at the urging of his head of security, who had implemented discreet surveillance following the initial incident with Craig Westfield. The recording revealed with damning clarity how Craig had slipped documents into Shayla's unattended purse during the morning rush, confirming Victor's suspicion that the Westfield family had orchestrated this division between them for purposes yet unknown. Across the city and the frigid confines of Douglas Westfield's office, truth unravelled like a tapestry whose pattern only became clear when viewed from sufficient distance, as Douglas revealed with disturbing satisfaction that his father had actually acquired the cultural artifacts through questionable transactions during a post-war chaos, only to have them subsequently recovered by Maxwell Harrington, working in conjunction with authorities investigating art theft. Shayla listened with growing horror as Douglas explained how the Harrington family had hired her grandmother Rose specifically for her background in art history and cataloguing, entrusting her with encoding the location after Douglas's father made multiple attempts to reclaim what he considered rightfully his, regardless of the original ownership claims by families devastated by war. The Phoenix tattoo contained coordinates to artifacts that legitimately belonged to the Harrington Foundation, intended for eventual museum donation rather than private collection, making Victor's partnership appear genuine while exposing Douglas's deception with brutal clarity. When Shayla refused to cooperate despite this revelation, maintaining that she needed time to verify these competing claims independently, Douglas tapped his tablet screen with manicured fingernails, bringing up Zoe's current school registration and foster care transition documents, explaining with clinical detachment how his considerable donations to child welfare organizations had created relationships with officials who could easily find regulatory reasons to reverse custody decisions recently made in Shayla's favor. His voice remained conversational while outlining how quickly Zoe could be returned to state care pending reevaluation, how school enrollment could encounter unexpected complications, how Teresa might find parole considerations negatively impacted by administrative reviews, the implied threat wrapping around Shayla's heart like barbed wire as she realized the vulnerability created by her precarious guardianship status. The ultimate challenge crystallized before her with merciless clarity, forcing her to choose between protecting her grandmother's legacy by refusing cooperation with either party until she discovered the full truth, or potentially sacrificing her niece's stability and her sister's future by defying someone with the power and willingness to destroy the fragile foundation she had built with Victor's initial payment, understanding that whatever choice she made would irrevocably alter lives across generations, past and present, converging into a single moment of moral reckoning that would define not just the artifact's fate but her own character. The polished chrome door to Douglas Westfield's office swung open with unexpected force, security guards reaching instinctively for weapons before recognizing Victor Harrington as he strode into the Arctic atmosphere with purpose that radiated from him like physical heat, manila folders clutched in his hand containing documents whose contents would permanently alter the power dynamic between the three people now facing each other across the minimalist glass desk. Douglas rose from his ergonomic chair with controlled fury barely masked beneath professional courtesy, his security team hovering at calculated distances that suggested preparation for multiple scenarios, as Victor placed photographs before Shayla showing Craig planting documents in her purse, followed by financial records revealing decades of questionable transactions between the Westfield family and known art thieves specializing in cultural artifacts displaced during wartime chaos. Victor explained with measured precision that he had contacted the original investigators from the 1970s case, now retired but still possessing documentation that confirmed Douglas's father had been under federal investigation for purchasing stolen art, When Maxwell Harrington and Rose Williams had worked together to recover pieces intended for legitimate museums and cultural institutions, not private collections. The air in the office seemed to crystallize with tension as Douglas attempted to dismiss the evidence, while simultaneously signaling his security team to move closer, the threat implicit in their synchronized positioning, creating a dangerous undercurrent beneath the civilized veneer of business discussion. While Shayla remained caught between these powerful men whose families had waged this battle across generations. Unlike Douglas, who continued pressing for immediate information about the tattoo while making thinly veiled references to Zoe's precarious custody situation, Victor addressed Shayla directly with respect that acknowledged her agency in this pivotal moment, asking not for the artifact's location, but simply for her truth, her assessment of which man's character warranted trust with her grandmother's carefully guarded secret. The weight of decision pressed upon Shayla like physical gravity as she evaluated not their promises or threats, but the fundamental nature each Marco had revealed through actions rather than words, seeing how Douglas viewed people as disposable tools, while Victor had consistently demonstrated respect for her grandmother's role and her own autonomy despite their vastly different social positions. Sunlight reflected from the glass tower's exterior created momentary illumination across Victor's face, highlighting genuine concern that contrasted with Douglas's calculating expression, the moral test crystallizing into perfect clarity as Shayla recognized that artifacts, regardless of their monetary value, were ultimately objects, while the character demonstrated in pursuing them revealed souls worthy or unworthy of trust with legacies that transcended mere possession. Shayla rose from her chair with quiet dignity that seemed to physically transform the atmosphere in Douglas Westfield's sterile office, her decision crystallizing with absolute clarity as she turned deliberately toward Victor and away from Douglas's threats and manipulations. With steady voice that carried the weight of generations, she revealed that the Phoenix tattoo contained a final encoded element that her grandmother had entrusted only to family, a mathematical sequence hidden within the flame patterns that completed coordinates leading to a secure vault beneath the old Harrington summer estate, now a historical trust property outside the city limits. Douglas lunged forward with rage distorting his carefully maintained facade as Victor placed a protective hand on Shayla's shoulder. Security personnel frozen in momentary confusion until the office door opened again to admit police officers responding to an anonymous tip about financial irregularities, their timing suspiciously perfect as if fate itself had orchestrated this moment of reckoning. 3 days later, autumn sunlight filtered through dust motes dancing in the air of a long-abandoned wine cellar as Victor and Shayla carefully removed the false wall Rose Williams had helped construct decades earlier, revealing climate-controlled cases containing Renaissance paintings, illuminated manuscripts, religious icons, and historical documents whose combined cultural significance transcended their multi-million-dollar value, each piece tagged with information about the original families from whom they had been stolen during wartime chaos. Among the recovered artifacts lay a metal box containing financial records documenting the original illegal purchase by Douglas's father, followed by years of laundering attempts and bribery payments that created a paper trail of corruption extending into present-day development deals, evidence so compelling that Douglas Westfield spent that same evening being processed into police custody while reporters gathered outside his tower like circling birds of prey. Federal art crime investigators worked alongside historical preservation experts to catalogue each recovered piece, many destined for return to descendants of original owners or museums dedicated to their cultural heritage, the Harrington Foundation serving as temporary custodian, while courts determined final disposition based on careful provenance research rather than financial interest. Victor honoured every aspect of their partnership agreement with meticulous attention to detail, establishing Shayla as equal beneficiary in the foundation overseeing artifact restoration, her grandmother's role formally acknowledged in all documentation and press materials. The substantial finder's fee transferred to her account with additional funds allocated for Zoe's education trust. Justice manifested not merely in Douglas Westfield's arrest and subsequent prosecution for fraud, bribery, and attempted extortion, but in the complete historical record being restored after generations of deliberate obfuscation, truth finally emerging about both the artifact's journey and the moral character of those who had sought them for vastly different purposes, Victor and Shayla standing together before cameras as equal partners united by legacy transcending social divisions their grandparents had begun bridging decades earlier. Sunlight streamed through the polished windows of Rosie's diner, no longer flickering but steady and warm across newly installed red leather booths and gleaming chrome fixtures that maintained the classic aesthetic while upgrading every surface, system and appliance to state-of-the-art quality. Shayla moved through the Friday morning breakfast rush with the same efficiency she had displayed a year earlier, her black polo shirt with embroidered logo now bearing the small designation of owner beneath the familiar Rosie's Diner script, gold name tag still pinned above her heart as reminder of journeys travelled. She had maintained the tradition of working one shift weekly despite her transformed circumstances, believing that connection to staff and customers grounded her in values that money could never replace. The same philosophy that had led her to purchase and renovate the establishment rather than abandon it for more prestigious ventures. Regular customers still received the same warm greeting, though now they often asked about the Second Chance Family Foundation that occupied the newly constructed second floor, where paralegals and attorneys provided pro bono services to families separated by incarceration, helping navigate the labyrinthine legal system that had nearly destroyed her own family before the Phoenix tattoo changed everything. Teresa had been among the first beneficiaries of accelerated parole representation, now serving as program coordinator for family reunification services, her personal experience informing policies that had already helped 37 children return to stable homes with appropriate support systems. Victor arrived precisely at 9 for their weekly foundation meeting, accepting coffee from Shayla with the comfortable familiarity developed through months of board service, his business expertise helping transform her passion into sustainable structures, while her perspective kept their mission focused on practical assistance rather than theoretical solutions. The mahogany conference table upstairs had been crafted by graduates of the Foundation's Skills Trainings program, surrounding a phoenix mosaic whose design echoed the tattoo that still adorned her shoulder blade, now a symbol of pride rather than secret shame. Financial security had changed Shayla's external circumstances while reinforcing rather than replacing core values. Her substantial brownstone in a revitalized section of the River District housing, both Zoe and 2 foster teens transitioning from state care, her calendar balancing philanthropic obligations with attendance at school functions and family dinner nights that remained sacred, regardless of Foundation emergencies. She still rose before dawn once weekly to scrub floors alongside staff, understanding that legacy meant not merely establishing institutions but demonstrating through consistent action that dignity existed in all forms of honest work. Her grandmother Rose would have expected nothing less from the woman who now managed millions in charitable assets while remembering the weight of carrying 5 plates on one arm and the vulnerability of living paycheck to precarious paycheck. Victor had evolved from benefactor to genuine friend, their social differences rendered irrelevant by shared purpose that transcended conventional boundaries, his network opening doors while her perspective ensured they walked through them, with intention focused on justice rather than appearances, transformation complete yet continuing as ripples from their unlikely partnership expanded outward into lives neither could have imagined influencing just 12 months earlier. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow across the museum gallery, where display cases held illuminated manuscripts and Renaissance paintings, their beauty finally accessible to the public rather than hidden away as private possessions or locked in forgotten vaults. Shayla Williams stood at the podium in an elegant midnight blue gown with an open back that deliberately showcased the phoenix tattoo spreading its wings across her shoulder blade. The intricate design now enhanced with gold leaf accents that caught the light with each movement, transforming what had once been her deepest humiliation into a symbol of pride and power. 300 guests in formal attire filled the space, including city officials, cultural preservation experts, and families of original artifact owners, all gathered for the Second Chance Family Foundation Gala that marked 1 year of successful operation and the official opening of the special exhibition highlighting the recovered treasures alongside their complex history. Shayla gazed out at the assembled crowd, momentarily overwhelmed by the journey from Rosie's diner floor to this podium, her eyes finding Zoe sitting in the front row wearing her first formal dress, report card with straight A's tucked proudly in her small evening purse, Teresa beside her with freedom papers less than 3 months old, their family rebuilt from fragments into something stronger than before. Victor stood at the side of the stage, his encouraging nod providing the final confidence boost as Shayla began speaking without notes, her voice steady and clear as she recounted her grandmother Rose Williams passing down not just a mysterious tattoo, but a legacy of dignity, perseverance, and truth that transcended circumstances. The gathered dignitaries listened with rapt attention, as she described the Foundation's work helping children reunite with parents after incarceration, providing legal assistance that navigated Byzantine systems designed to separate rather than heal, creating pathways for families to rebuild what systems had broken. Shayla turned slightly to gesture toward the Phoenix artifact that had inspired her tattoo, now displayed prominently among treasures worth millions, explaining how objects carried stories, but people carried truth through generations, how her grandmother had protected cultural heritage, while simultaneously preserving family bonds that survived poverty, separation, and societal barriers. Her voice grew stronger with conviction as she addressed not just the wealthy donors, but the program participants seated among them. Families reunited through Foundation services, her gaze finally settling on Zoe, whose future now held possibilities beyond imagination 1 year earlier. The Phoenix tattoo seemed almost luminous against her skin as she concluded with words that resonated throughout the gallery, capturing the essence of transformation that had occurred not just in her circumstances, but in her understanding of true value. Sometimes our greatest treasures are not things, but the truth inside us waiting to be revealed. Applause thundered through the museum as Shayla stepped away from the podium, head held high, the journey from shame to pride complete as she embraced the legacy her grandmother had entrusted to her, understanding finally that worth came not from artifacts or bank accounts, but from the courage to stand in one truth regardless of circumstances.